You guys know the sprinter Usain Bolt?
Very familiar.
So he won 3 gold medals and ate 1,000 McDonald's chicken nuggets over 10 days at the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. What sounds insane is actually quite logical. He needed protein and couldn't afford to get sick. They were the only food I could properly trust which wouldn't affect my stomach, said Bolt. Eliminating even the smallest bit of catastrophic risk is often worth sacrificing optimization. Good enough, repeatedly, is actually how you get great. If you go to the gym and you do the most intense workout in the world, you'll look in the mirror afterwards and you'll see nothing, right? Then if you go back the next day and you do another intense workout, you'll look in the mirror and once again you'll see, again, nothing. But if you do a decent workout for long enough, however, you'll wake up one day in the future transformed. Now, how long is it going to take? I've no idea. And that's the hard part. Simon Sinek described the difference between intensity and consistency like this. He said, intensity is like going to the dentist. It's fixed in time. We know exactly what date we're going. We know how long we're going to be there. And we know that when we come out, our teeth will feel smooth and look pearly. But if that's all that we do, all of our teeth will fall out. In other words, intensity is not enough. So we're supposed to brush our teeth twice a day for 2 minutes in the morning and 2 minutes in the evening. What does brushing our teeth do for 2 minutes? Nothing. It does absolutely nothing. Unless you do it every single day. Can you leave out a day? Sure. How many days can you leave out? I don't know. How many times do you have to brush your teeth before it works? I don't know that either. And this is why companies don't do it. We love intensity for the simple reason that it's easy to measure. We can calculate the day and we can calculate the time. It's highly predictable, but it's consistency. That's the human part. What does it take to fall in love? Buy her flowers? Remember her birthday? Important. But if that's all that you do, it won't work. It's the little things. Like when you wake up in the morning and say good morning to her before you check your phone. When you get up to get a drink, you bring her one even if she doesn't ask. Either one of those things does nothing. But it's the accumulation of those things done repeatedly over time that one day somebody will wake up to you and say, oh my God, I love you. Really good workout advice is to always leave 1 to 2 reps in reserve. To not complete every set at your full capacity. To stay below your maximum threshold, to leave some gas in the tank. If you want to get into great shape, it's best to avoid maximum effort and instead focus on stacking small and controllable exercise wins over time. Now, in addition to the obvious benefit of injury avoidance, improved recovery, and motivation, the 85% rule, which, by the way, was popularized by the 8-time gold medalist sprinter Carl Lewis, actually improves performance in both fitness and work. Dan Go, a popular fitness coach and writer, shared on Twitter that going at 85% is a mindset about relaxation and performing at a high level while being in flow. It's about pacing, form, and finishing. At 85%, you're not striving or straining by operating at the very limit of your ability. Instead, you have room to think, focus, and adapt. Excellence is mundane, said the sociologist Daniel Chambliss. Excellence is accomplished through the doing of actions, ordinary in themselves, performed consistently and carefully, habitualized, compounded together, added up over time. A mystery is information not known. A secret is concealed knowledge. Books and podcasts tend to mystify excellence. But of course, with success, according to Chambliss, there's no secret. There's only the doing of all those little things, each one done correctly time and again, until excellence in every detail becomes a firmly ingrained habit, an ordinary part of one's everyday life. When the 3-time Olympic gold medal swimmer Mary Meagher was asked what the public least understood about her sport, here's what she said. People don't know how ordinary success is. Becoming elite is a remarkably dull process. The podcaster Steph Smith wrote that in reality, so long as you, number one, choose your daily actions wisely, and number two, consistently execute over time, good things will reliably happen. She then added, to be clear, consistency isn't necessarily the easiest way to success, but the one that can be achieved with a higher level of certainty. A couple years ago, we were living in a condo that overlooked the ocean in the Dominican Republic. For a month, we'd watch the crashing waves. One day, the tide picked up. Within 24 hours, we were evacuated as the ocean ripped apart the high-end resort. I've never seen power like this. Chunks, hundreds of pounds of concrete with rebar, taken, tossed 100 meters into the bottom of a condo where we were sleeping at night. It was crazy to witness. A fad is a wave in the ocean, and a trend is the tide, wrote Al Ries and Jack Trout in the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. A fad gets a lot of hype, and a trend gets very little. Like a wave, a fad is very visible, but it goes up and down in a big hurry. Like the tide, a trend is almost invisible, but it's powerful over the long term. Never mistake a clear view for a short distance, advises the Stanford professor Paul Staffel. Superfluous and superficial tactics get undue attention. It's true that success leaves clues, but what's visible is like an iceberg floating with 1/7 of its bulk above water. Above water? Shit, that's a typo. Above. All right. The work that really matters is invisible to the eye. Be wary of advice that has the shelf life of a brown banana. Categorize information as either permanent or expiring. Ask yourself, in 5 years, will this still work? Expiring advice isn't necessarily bad. It does, however, tend to distract us. The hard part isn't choosing your actions. It's sticking with them. So first, what I want to do is tell a quick story about a German general who was forced into retirement for opposing Hitler in 1934. Next, some encouragement to maintain a steady pace below your maximum threshold. And finally, a process for finding your good. This section is actually the final section of the book in part 2, which is all about how to actually take on and do the habits and the things to become successful reliably, to become the obvious choice. And this is probably lowercase ge good enough is what this is going to be called. I love that Simon Sinek passage where he talks about the dentist. Oh, it's so good.
It's super good.
That dude has this. That dude has this ability to just pace when he speaks, unlike anybody I've ever seen. You look at him and it's just like the intonation, the way that he says the words. Even, I mean, there are parts in that passage. It wasn't anything that he wrote. It was a video that I had found of his, and he speaks. He the cadence of it. He speaks in full sentences and long sentences, and then he speaks in sentence fragments, and it's so perfectly done. You know, this part of like, what does it take to fall in love? Buy her flowers. Remember her birthday. Important. But if that's all you do, it won't work. It's just like, God. To communicate like that. Well, to communicate like that, the amount of practice and preparation that must take, I think we take it for granted when we see it. I mean, to write like that is one thing, but to communicate like that in an interview, God damn, man. Anyway, I'm going to butcher this dude's name. General Kurt von Hammerstein-Eckord. The Germans! Was a German officer. He was famous for two things. The German officer was famous for opposing Hitler and how he divided officers. So this guy was actually, I think he was the chief of staff. He was like the highest ranking German general. And when Hitler came into power, he was forced into retirement because he opposed what Hitler was doing. According to von Hammerstein, every officer, you can't say a German name without saying it like that.
Von Hammerstein.
Von Hammerstein. Eisengluten.
Get to the chopper.
They really like gluten in German. Eisengluten.
Yeah, definitely high gluten tolerance in Germany.
Definitely high gluten in Germany.
They're made of bread practically.
Yeah.
That's
and
science.
choppers.
Don't
Bread and choppers. Made of bread and choppers.
Get the bread and get to the chopper.
So according to this dude, every officer possesses at least 2 of the following qualities: clever, lazy, stupid, or industrious. One of the hardest things to do is to be consistently good for long enough for it to pay off. Impactful daily efforts are quite small when they're focused. So a few examples of that. If you're a thought leader, writing 500 words a day is going to take you 30 minutes to an hour. Do that for 3.5 months and you're going to have the first draft of a 50,000 word book. If you want to get into shape, 3 hours of exercise a week is enough to reduce your risk of heart disease, depression, weight gain, diabetes, certain types of cancers, and premature death. That's 1.8% of your time. If you work in real estate, 15 personal messages every weekday touching base with leads is 3,900 people you've given personal attention to every year. In every field, the examples are similar. The impactful tasks take a small percentage of the time. Most of the rest of that time is filled with notifications, interruptions, or things we're not quite sure we should do, but think maybe we should do for reasons we can't explain. Being busy results from indiscriminate thinking. It is a punishment imposed on those who avoid making the few critically important decisions or lack the fortitude to stick with it. It's hard to stick to a routine of writing 500 words a day. It's easy to jump from trend to trend, focusing on whatever social media short-form content is in vogue. It's hard to call 10 leads every day to touch base. It's easy to buy into some newfangled software tool that measures a small and largely inconsequential metric. It's hard to be okay with knowing enough to take action, but it's easy to listen to just one more podcast hoping that it'll hold the secret that you've been missing. General Hamilton Ecord knew that hard work is very often misdirected. Under his command, the lazy yet clever officers got the best positions, and the stupid yet hardworking ones got fired. It's easy to get bogged down searching for the optimal plan for change, the fastest way to lose weight, the best program to build muscle, the perfect idea for a side hustle, writes James Clear. He then added that the only way to become excellent is to be endlessly fascinated by doing the same things over and over again. You have to fall in love with boredom. What a wonderful idea in theory. The faulty assumption is that it's possible to seek boredom. Social media, email, shopping, video games, news, television, and even online dating are too well designed. The psychological challenge is too great. You can't rely on self-control or discipline. It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight, says Tim Ferriss. Don't seek boredom. Seek the freeing feeling that comes when you're content with your rhythm. That is an Amber-ism, by the way.
Nice.
You guys are getting the first acknowledgement in this book, I'll tell you that much.
Well, thank you, John.
Not getting any money, but the first acknowledgement in the book.
We assumed that already.
Yeah, fair enough. The Germans. Why are the Germans coming? One simple way.
John just had a stroke. Oh, God.
So one simple way to achieve this sort of contentment is to never log on to the internet. But for most of us, that's not realistic. Another way is to add more technology like website blockers, time trackers, and the such that cover up the effects their sister companies have created. And then, of course, there's the slew of focus drugs, some legal and some not. I don't like any of those 3 options. The human brain has evolved over thousands of years. removing ourselves from society, layering on more tech as a band-aid, or hacking it with brain chemistry altering drugs doesn't appeal. I talk about the biohacking movement a lot on this podcast, and I got nothing against biohackers. I got nothing against whatever you decide to do. All that I know is my brain. I don't want to fuck with that chemistry. That's all that there is to it. There's just like, sure, you might feel better. Sure, you might be more focused, but like, what's the underlying problem? And what are you actually doing in that time that you're more focused? Like, how much more are you accomplishing and how much does it matter? And have you actually taken the time to think about what you're doing more so that you have to do less versus just hopping yourself up on some neurotropic drug or drink or whatever it is? I think it's completely insane, personally, to change the physiology of your brain so that you can accomplish more. Like,
you're not going to offend any biohackers, John. They bailed around episode 30, buddy. But
Jesus.
They're not listening.
The polyamorous biohacking jujitsu competing ice bath taking vegans from Southern California, like, y'all are just not right for the obvious choice.
Doesn't apply to you guys.
But enjoy your psilocybins, I guess. So
at Burning Man.
Enjoy your psilocybins at Burning Man, bro.
Oh, man.
It ain't for me. I don't hate. You do you. It ain't for me. What I think is that our primitive brains are simply unequipped for navigating an evolved world. We can't swap them out for an updated model, though. Instead, we need to work with what we've got. For me, a new insight from a well-known psychological experiment held the key. Anything you want to talk about before I get into that experiment?
I think the first portion just perfectly describes coaching and training other humans.
What's up?
Every bit of, hey, go to the gym twice, no change.
What?
Go to the dentist twice, it's not going to keep your teeth from falling out. Just the idea, people really fail because they just stop. I had an old boss who used to say, Ren, my man, you'll either succeed or you quit. No in between. That's it.
Yeah.
You'll either succeed or quit. And I didn't quite understand it at the time, but coaching humans now, I get it. I think people just don't. This is for the people that are looking for coaches and trying to get in shape. Like, it's just, you can do almost anything. Almost anything. And if you did it for 5 years, exercise-wise,
What?
it's just going to, by accident, you'll end up better off.
So I got a messed up stat for you. In 2022, here, let me bring up the exact stat because this is actually, I think, going to go into the next section.
Show the numbers.
So in 2022, the pharmaceutical, vitamin, and supplement industries were worth 21.8 times as much as the entire health and fitness industry, rest of the health and fitness industry combined. The fitness and health industry was worth $30.6 billion in 2022. The pharmaceutical, vitamin, and supplement industries were worth $668.9 billion.
That's incredible.
And what's interesting to me about that is if you ask basically anybody what they think is more important, avoiding getting sick or taking something after you've already been sick to help fix the problem, they'll say, oh, I don't want to get sick in the first place. But then you look at what money and time is actually spent on, and it's spent on overcomplicating really at its core very simple problems. And I'm not downplaying the need for pharmaceuticals, and I think that they're very important, but I don't think anybody can argue the fact that we wouldn't need most of those things, and we don't need most of those things. And so I'm not sure how much I'm going to go into it in the next section. This is one of the parts that I have to write, and I'm kind of procrastinating on it. But I think a lot about the fitness industry, and the way that I kind of talk about it is that if you could make it in the fitness industry, you could make it anywhere. Like if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Because think about what makes for the best product to sell. It is easy, it works quick, and it doesn't hurt. So basically, hey, take a pill, right? And then you think about what fitness is. Fitness is hard, it takes a long time, and it's painful. Mm-hmm. Now, add to that humans' tendency to seek overcomplicated processes as a sign of value. It's more intellectually stimulating to talk about something that sounds complicated than it is to actually solve a really easy problem that's really straightforward. And so this is why, the top fitness and health podcasts, for example, in the world, overcomplicate the most inane, minor, inconsequential aspects of fitness. And they use all these fancy terms to describe them, scientific terms to describe them. And I think that in some respects, there's some need for researchers doing that work. But for the people consuming that information, overwhelmingly, it's just mental masturbation. It's nothing more than that. Mm-hmm. The way to sell fitness information is to take a largely inconsequential element, make it sound way more important than it actually is, and surround it with a whole bunch of technical jargon and scientific studies. Because you just simply can't, especially when you're selling information at podcasts or whatever it is, you're having to produce 2 or 3 podcasts a week that are a couple hours long. There ain't that much that's important, dude. But you think about misaligned incentives. And the incentives when you produce content, when you're being paid by advertisers, when you're being paid basically more, the more content you produce, the more you're being paid. The incentives incentivize you to talk more about things, even if there's nothing to talk about that's important, and make it sound like it is much more important than it is. And so I don't knock the people who do it, but it's a really big problem. And it's a really confusing problem. And I'm talking about that in the next chapter, which I've yet to write. But, on one hand, it's important to understand that this is an issue when you're consuming information. On the other hand, when you're trying to do something, there actually is very often much easier solutions to whatever problem you're having. There's a company named Embrace, and it was a project. It was like an MIT, no, not an MIT. It was like an MBA, like final project for students at Stanford or something like that. That has now turned into a big business. But they were tasked with making baby incubators more affordable for the developing world. And so it's still a huge problem where infant mortality in the developing world, people who don't live close to a modern hospital, very spread out. Infant mortality is a huge, completely avoidable infant mortality is a huge problem. And it would largely be eliminated if incubators were more available. Well, the problem with incubators that exist in hospitals is that they need a reliable power source, which may not exist, and they're really expensive to produce. And so this MBA group was tasked with figuring out how to solve this problem. And they looked at it from an engineering standpoint, right? How can we get cheaper materials? How can we get power generators that maybe use solar or wind or sun that don't rely on this grid that doesn't work that well? And they couldn't figure it out. They couldn't knock it. They could get the price down from like thousands to like 500 or whatever, but that was still way too expensive. And then they said, well, what do incubators really do? And I didn't know this, but something like 95% of lives saved by incubators are saved because the incubator regulates the temperature of the newborn baby. That's all it does. It regulates the temperature and keeps it consistent because the baby, particularly babies that are born premature, can't regulate their own body temperature. So all of a sudden now, they realized that trying to solve the generally accepted engineering problem was hard, edgy, and impossible. Instead, what they built was they basically built a sleeping bag with a gel pack. And they've saved hundreds of thousands of lives. When you separate yourself from hard technical problems that might be more intellectually stimulating, like speaking to material scientists or electric power specialists, and you separate yourself and you say, well, is there a simpler thing that actually is much easier, even if it doesn't trigger that part of my brain that makes me intellectually curious in the same way? Well, maybe a sleeping bag with a gel pack that can be heated in a pot of boiling water is the solution. That's what they did. Fascinating stuff. Back to the study. So the Stanford marshmallow experiment was a study on delayed gratification from 1972. Kids were given a marshmallow and they were told to wait. And if they didn't eat it by the time the experimenter got back, they got a second marshmallow. Then the kids were followed up with for decades. It was found that the ones who delayed gratification, the ones who didn't immediately shove that marshmallow in their face, were more successful later in life. And the predictive power of the specific study has been questioned and actually largely kicked out. But the idea that blindly doing the hard work today in the hopes that it'll benefit you later, delaying gratification, will result in more success, it's kind of hard to argue that fundamental point. Okay. So we had Chinese hot pot dinner at my mother-in-law's house. We call her Pawpaw. This is Allison's mom. Pawpaw is like basically grandma in Chinese. So we call her Pawpaw. Pawpaw bought marshmallows to roast because Chinese hot pot, you've got a butane stove, and so it's like a soup that everybody shares, and then you have a butane stove. So she bought marshmallows to roast afterwards. It's like a nice thing for Calvin. And this bag of marshmallows had both pink and white marshmallows. So first off, I don't know why they make pink marshmallows. They're weird. White marshmallows, though, on the other hand, are a gift sent from the heavens.
Once again, brother, I see it's all about the whites. I rebuke that statement in the name of Black Hood and Pink Marshmallow Hood everywhere. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock.
The marshmallows are coming.
There's a lot of Nazi racism tie-in on this episode, John, and I'm uncomfortable following up the episode where I saw your feed on the Instagram. I'm getting less and less comfortable with this entire production.
Love how you needed to buffer the Nazi German racism numbers with some sort of reference to black people. like you're like, we gotta buffer this. We gotta round this out a little bit.
Mission accomplished. I can clock out for the day.
A Jewish guy, a white woman, and a black guy start a podcast
to talk about Nazis. I'm sorry, John. I had an outburst of blackness. Can you continue? It happens.
So before we had dinner, Calvin and I had just one marshmallow after swimming. I was a responsible father. He only had one. I was not, however.
Responsible adult.
I was not, however, a responsible human. I ate all of the white ones. All of them.
How sick were you after?
I felt amazing.
I think you're lying. My tummy feels sick just thinking about it.
Allison even asked whether the bag only came with pink marshmallows.
was on the maltodextrin high.
So here's my problem with that 1972 study. I would have eaten that marshmallow before the researcher even stood up. I am hopelessly addicted to immediacy. Delayed gratification sounds nice, but it just ain't me. My lizard brain is too unevolved for that. So what? Am I screwed?
Oh, man.
Most people are like me. We need ongoing rewards and attaboys and thumbs up. Big audacious goals are not motivating. The process, therefore, must become both the focus and the reward. You've heard this before. I know. Fall in love with the process is advice that sells a lot of self-help books. Admittedly, it's hard. The best advice I've ever gotten that I've always ignored is to enjoy the journey. Sometimes, though, I'm able to find ounces of enjoyment in the day-to-day mundanity. With the admission that I'm not perfect, I'm going to share a few things that I do when I'm doing this right and that I start doing again when I catch myself messing this up. So the first is to fail better, faster. Failure is like a bee sting. Before you get stung, you're told it hurts, but you don't know how much. It's scary. The unknown always is. And of course, getting stung hurts, but then it's over and you realize that it wasn't a big deal and life goes on so you aren't as scared of it happening the next time. Failure is the same way. The more it happens, the less afraid of it you become. If you're not failing, you're not trying enough. Similarly, if you're not getting stung by bees, you're probably not getting out into nature and exploring enough. The second is to design mini rewards. Break up a big task into small parts and design a reward into each part. You could post more often on social media by texting a friend a thumbs up emoji whenever you've done it. You could write your book by breaking it up into 300 to 700 word sections. Put the title for each section on a cue card. Once finished, flip that cue card face down on the left side of your computer. You can perform your daily sales calls by keeping 25 paper clips on your desk. Every time you make a call, take one paper clip and put it in a cup. In each example, the process is similar. Design a small reward, ideally both visual and tactical, as a measurement of small process, representative of a bigger thing. Tactical isn't the right word. What's the word when you can feel something?
Palpable?
It's
Yeah.
tactile.
Tactile.
Oh, gotcha.
That makes more
Good
sense.
word, Amber.
Nice word, Aaron. Nice word.
This whole thing's
Reading
just a
books
game
helps.
of Scrabble. That's all it is.
So, when the author Neil Gaiman sits down to write, he gives himself an option. You can write or you can not write. If you've listened to this podcast before, you've heard me tell this before. He says, what I love about that is I'm giving myself permission to write or not write, but the writing is actually more interesting than doing nothing after a while. You sit there and you've been staring out the window now for 5 minutes and it kind of loses its charm. You're going, well, actually, let's all write something. Gaiman later added, you don't have to write. You have permission to not write, but you don't have permission to do anything else. There was a series of studies done at Boston University that tested the difference between the words I don't and I can't. 120 people were split into two groups. One told themselves I don't eat candy and the others told themselves I can't. They were then offered a chocolate bar. The I can't group ate the bar 61% of the time. The I don't group ate it 36% of the time. A 25% difference in self-control resulted from the subtle change of words. The reason why is that I can't is a restriction, not a choice. I don't, on the other hand, retains your sense of power and personal agency. I'm writing a book. It's this book. This podcast is based off of the book. It's a big project. The release date is over a year away. I've already been working on it for a year and a half. The goal of releasing this book is simply too big and too far away to be motivating. Goals are intense, fleeting, and binary. You either achieve a goal or you don't. If you don't, you failed. If you do, you'll be rewarded with fleeting, momentary pleasure. After briefly celebrating climbing the mountain, you'll feel empty because the only thing that was giving you purpose is now gone. The only way to get that feeling back is to declare another goal, setting you up for a cycle of perpetual misery, always striving to get there, never being here. The British writer Alan Watts observed that we're trained to have this misguided obsession with goals at a young age. He said, as a child, you were sent to nursery school. In nursery school, they say you are getting ready to go on to kindergarten, and then first grade is coming up, and second grade, and third grade. In high school, they tell you you're getting ready for college, and in college, you're getting ready to go out into the business world. People are like donkeys running after carrots that are hanging in front of their faces from sticks attached to their own collars. They are never here, they are never there, they are never alive. Perhaps this is why I hated school, but loved education. I'll do everything in my power to make this book a success. But I'm also aware that I can't control the outcome. And so if it doesn't succeed, I'll be upset. And then I'll move on and begin the next. And if it does succeed, I'll be happy, and then I'll move on and begin the next. So long as I stick to this plan, success is guaranteed. How long will it take? I have no idea. Will I recognize when I've succeeded? It's unlikely. And so the book's release isn't a goal, more so a waypoint that acts like a beacon guiding my daily actions. Most mornings I sit down at my kitchen table at 5 a.m. for 2 hours intending to write. Some days I don't. Some days I sit there looking out the window, but I'm okay with that because I've given myself two choices, write or do nothing. Conventional wisdom dictates that you have to set goals, but if you study successful people, one commonality you will find is that they don't do it. Maybe they started with goal setting, but they never attribute their success to their goals. They attribute it to their systems. Systems are consistent, reliable, and fluid. System-oriented thinking views goals as beacons, something to aim towards. They provide direction, moving you forward in the correct, broad pattern. Achievement should be viewed as waypoints, a part of a greater journey, and not endpoints, the end of one journey and beginning of another. The key thing about systems is that they focus on a set of behaviors, not outcomes, and anticipate ups and downs because nobody is perfect and we have to account for that. If you're in business, your goal might be to make more money. Your system might be to have a minimum of 5 sales conversations a day. Whether or not you make a sale that day isn't as important as performing the calls, because if you perform the calls, good things will happen. If you're in fitness, your goal might be to get in shape. Your system might be as simple as putting your workout clothing on. Whether or not you work out that day isn't as important as putting your clothing on, because most days if you put your workout clothes on, you're going to exercise. But if you don't, that's fine, because some days you won't be feeling it. Now, the opposite of this works as well if you want to stop doing something negative. If your goal is to eat less junk food, your system might be to not keep it in the house. You're allowed to eat it, but you have to leave your house to get it. Most of the time, you won't leave the house and walk to the gas station for a Mars bar because you're not actually hungry. You're tired. Systems over goals. Process over action. Then sales call by sales call, rep by rep, word by word. You'll be pulled in the right direction. How long is it going to take? I don't know. But that doesn't matter because getting better is more enjoyable than reaching your goal, than getting there. Not only that, but the moment you get there, it'll become the new here and there will be a new there anyway. Still, there's a lot of different things you could be doing. So how do you decide what to focus on? I'll pause there because that was a long section.
Oh man,
Yeah.
I've grown less and less fond of goals as I've coached. Excuse me, over the course of the last decade. Not because I don't believe in them, but because people get so destination oriented about them, that they can't find any joy in the process. I'm much more fixated on intentions now, because intentions can be delivered in the absence of reaching the goal. If I'm, the goal of wanting to get married versus the intention of being a supportive partner, right? If it's a marriage, you're waiting on the wedding incessantly. But if the goal is to be a loving, supportive partner, date 3, I can open the car door or open the door to the venue or listen intently to what she's saying, or et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
It's much easier to sustain intention than it is to sustain effort when it's like a far off goal. So I'm on the systems and processes and intention, because those can be really distracting and frustrating for people, especially the people that I get as a coach, because I'm usually the last stop. I'm the caboose of their fitness train. By the time they get to me, they've done keto, they've done Weight Watchers.
Right.
Their relationship with the goal is just the thing that you quit before you get to, or it's the thing
Yeah.
that you never see happen. And I don't want to indulge that for the 99th time with my program. So we gotta flip the script, change it up a little bit. I
Well, what
like
does the
that passage.
goal embody for you, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
goal is almost random. It represents some bigger picture of who we want to be. And if you can identify that, and then you can get into, okay, if that's the type of person you're wanting to become, what kind of actions come with that? Right? Then
Yes.
it, like you're saying, it's not about the goal, it's about
Yes.
the actions that type of person would take. But most people aren't great at communicating,
Mm-hmm.
and so they default to, oh, here's the thing that I see, and once I do this thing I will be there. But we know that that's not true. It's just really difficult unless you're really self-aware and can communicate well on top of that, trying to explain that, and then hopefully the other person understands what the hell you mean.
Right.
It requires a perfect storm for that to work out.
Can I ask you guys a question about how I communicated those last passages, that last section? Specifically, it's I'm I'm trying very hard with this book. I kind of default to being very preachy with my writing, and almost it feels almost safer to me naturally to write as if I'm like separated from the topic,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm and to write almost like aspirational, like not necessarily this is me who embodies this thing, but this is me who does the thing, like this is me who like wants to do the thing, so I'm telling you what I feel like I should be doing. And you can often feel that when a writer is doing that. And I find what makes great nonfiction is the author very much embodies what they're saying. And I guess my question with this particularly is I'm trying to say like this is what I'm doing when I'm doing it right. This isn't me saying that I'm perfect. I don't think anybody is. Did that come across? Were there areas that were more preachy? Was it more like, hey, we're on the same team here?
I default to the Amber. Her radar is better for this type of thing than mine.
Yeah.
It just
I think
is.
so. I think there's room to, and maybe that's coming into the next part, but what my brain is expecting is, okay, here's what it looks like when it's going well. But are we going to get into, okay, I do fall off because of X, Y, and Z, because that is life. We don't live in a vacuum. Here's how I get back on track. So I don't know if that's upcoming, or and we just haven't gotten there yet, or if it got glossed over.
Well, like what to do is the next section. Yeah. Not
Okay.
necessarily
Yeah,
what to
and
do when you fall off track, but I mean, yeah, maybe there's a place to add something like that. I mean, what to do
yeah,
when
it's
I
more
fall off
later to maybe
track is I
about
just
what.
go back to these notes and I just say basically like do this again. That's what I
Yeah,
do.
because you mentioned earlier about that as, okay, here's what I do when it's going right, and here's what I do when I start slacking on these things. So my brain
Yeah.
was expecting that next part, which at least so far hasn't been super clear. But some
Hmm.
relatability of what is taking you off track, I think, is helpful.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think you froze.
My dad's literally a preacher, so I don't have a good I don't have a good
You're
filter
used.
when things sound preachy. They just sounds like my dad would say it.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I've been conditioned.
And I think too, like with adding studies and stuff like that, like picking a few is really great, but if we have too many, then that's what can get into the preachy part, at
Yeah.
least for me.
Well, and also just like getting deep into the study. Like if I'm going to mention a study, it's going to be like 3 lines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not. This was a meta-analysis, and like we've all read those books where it's just like he just spent 2 pages describing the experimental design. Like, I don't give a shit.
Right.
What does this
Well, and it
mean?
can take you out of the story too, right? Because it, like for me,
Way
when I think
out.
about a study, that my brain switches into logical mode versus kind of being emotionally invested into
Yeah,
the
fair.
storyline, and so
Right.
being
That's
careful
a
with
great
switching
point.
back and forth.
Right. Okay. Okay. So finding your good. So I get it. How do I find out what to focus on? First, dedicate a period of time for a series of rapid tests. You got to experiment. You got to study yourself. What's right for me is not going to be right for you. Write down a list of everything that you feel you should be doing, knowing that you can only choose one at the end. Then every 1 to 2 weeks, try out one of them at a time. For example, let's say you choose podcasting as one of your tests. For 2 weeks, you're going to immerse yourself by recording a podcast every day and only consuming information about podcasts. Your testing cycle should be fast so that you can run through a lot of experiments quickly. They won't be long enough to get any results. That's fine. It's not results you're after. It's confidence in the process. Maybe after podcasts, you'll try networking with local businesses or knocking on doors or writing blog posts. After each test, answer 3 questions. Number 1, did I enjoy this? Number 2, do I feel like I could get good at this? And number 3, if I were to continue this for a year, would I be in a better place than I am now? Once you've answered yes to all 3 questions, you're done. You've found what's right for you, your thing. Let your good guide your rhythm, focused on 4 elements: soft skills, technical know-how, network, and execution. For example, let's say you chose YouTube. Join a local improv group in order to level up your public speaking, humor, and storytelling soft skills. Learn best practices for video production, thumbnail creation, and converting viewers to customers. Organize a local group of aspiring video creators. Once done, invite well-known YouTubers to share it to your up-and-comer group. And of course, publish a weekly video. It was the final day of one of those marketing events where every guy seemed to be wearing standard marketing guy apparel. Dark blue jeans, white v-neck, blazer, and a pre-faded leather satchel they got from the Banana Republic. The final speaker was Michael Gerber. He's the author of The E-Myth, 5 million copies sold. This guy was different when he walked up to the stage. Big smile, big gray beard, straw hat, no slides. He was silent for a few seconds when he took in the crowd, and then he said, "Now I just got here, so I didn't see any of the other speakers, but I can guess what they did. I bet they all had some nice-looking PowerPoint and a fancy acronym outlining a system that'll solve all your problems that you can learn about if you buy their book in the lobby." I sat forward in my chair. Gerber continued, "I don't have any of those things. The truth is that I'm just making it up as I go. Always have. Don't you realize that you can too?" There might be a capital B best way to do something. Never forget that there's seemingly infinite lowercase ge good enough ways that'll work just fine. What you choose to do doesn't have to be the best. You'll never know if it is anyway. What's important is that it's good. Once you've found your good, stop looking. Sure, there might be better, but the compounding only begins when you start and stops when you change or quit. So find your good, close the book, and execute. And yes, you can make it up as you go too.
I like the ending there.
The whole thing.
The story or just the last line?
The last line there.
The
There's
find your
another line
good.
earlier too about, about what was it? Something about like not here or there, and when you're there, there's a new there. There was
Yeah.
like a line, that cadence was really satisfying.
So here's where that line came from. So I talk in an earlier chapter about how you need to just do like random shit for no reason. And this is it's the algorithms change, humans don't. It's the how to basically thrive in a world of technology. And really, I mean, my conclusion at the end is just to gain such a wide variety of random experiences that there's no way that anybody could make sense of it, because if there's anything that you can make sense of, a computer is going to be able to do it better than you. And so the only way to thrive is to really create this collection of like weirdness and oddities that brings it together. And I think that's going to be the difference. We're going to see a lot of books. We're going to see a lot of creative works that are going to be made by algorithms, by AI coming out. And I think the really great works are things that are never going to be able to be created with AI. For example, Jennifer, who helps me with the media, sent me this tool called Perplexity. And she said, it's an AI tool. I think it'll help with your research. It'll really help with you searching stuff and finding stories. And I said, thank you. And I saved it. And I haven't even opened it yet, but I said, thank you. And I saved it. But I said to her, I was just like, to be completely honest, my process for researching and finding these stories and writing is really slow and it's really inefficient. And I have zero desire to improve upon that. How I find a lot of these types of stories and research papers, for example, that paper where I quoted Chambliss, the sociologist, that's a 1989 sociological paper it's called The Mundanity of Excellence. It's a phenomenal paper, one of the best finds I've ever come across. You know how deep I had to go into the internet to find that? You can't just, because what an AI engine is always going to give you is it's going to give you the most common responses to the questions that you ask, which means you're going to get the same stories, you're going to get the same examples over and over and over again, which just creates for this almost superficial layer of, yeah, I've heard that, yeah, I've heard that, yeah, I've heard that. Whereas the true gold actually goes and tries to find or comes from finding all of the people who are like geekily obsessed about this. So here's my secret. Here's what I do. When there's something that I know that I want to write about, I know that I want to find a story about it, right? And so I'll search because I'm like, there's no way that I'm the first person to ever have this idea. It just doesn't exist. So what I'll do is I'll search under a bunch of different topics across Google, across like different articles, anything that people have written about this. And then I'll go into Twitter and I'll go into Reddit and I'll find the articles and I'll look for any discussions on the top articles of these things. And then I'll look at the comments under those articles. What you find is that Twitter and Reddit specifically are platforms where the people who are on them are often that like behind the scenes, just obsessive about their thing. And they're the ones. So that's like 4 layers deep, right? So that Chambliss article was a very common piece, Steph Smith's article that a lot of people have read and a lot of people quote, that I quote on this too, about finding your good. And there was in her article, she embedded a bunch of tweets. In the embedded tweets was an article about body painters and how a body painter had found excellence. So then I searched for more about that body painter. And in a tweet about more about that body painter, somebody in the Twitter responses shared this paper from Chambliss. You can't get that through an AI engine. And so that line that had that cadence, if you're trying to get there, you'll never get there because the second you get there, it'll be the new here anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I had a friend a number of years back who is very Christian, and just invited me one day to go to one of these like huge preachers. I don't even remember what his name was, but one of the like really famous preachers. Mm-hmm. He was in Toronto, and it was like a Tuesday night, and this guy sold out a hockey arena with 5,500 people. And so I went with him because I was like, well, I mean, I'm not interested in the Christianity bit of this, but like, God, I mean, I'm fascinated. Clearly there's something here that is moving people, right? And so I went to it. And he was the most incredible public speaker I've ever seen. Nobody has come close. I went to the Ontario Economic Forum and spent an afternoon at the Ontario Economic Forum one time many years ago because Bill Clinton was speaking at it. And how often do you get a chance to listen to Bill Clinton, who's widely regarded as one of the best orators of all time? I didn't care. He was talking about wind energy or some shit. Like I sat there with a notebook and I was studying how he was speaking. And it was the same thing with this megachurch event, where that line was a line that he said, and I wrote it down.
Interesting. I love that.
That's what I mean when I say that you can't really, like, how much do I talk about how, I mean, where I think artificial intelligence has a lot of good. God, it's gonna become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But like, there's no way that it's ever going to be able to do any of that stuff because none of that shit makes sense. When I say it, when I talk about the process, maybe, but like, you could never train any system to find a 1989 sociological paper called The Mundanity of Excellence about swimmers when I'm trying to talk about how important it is, even the Usain Bolt example of like the chicken nuggets. Yeah. I mean, this is as weird as it sounds. Like, this to me is my art.
Yeah. So, fellow ADHDers, this is our wheelhouse. Is this right here? Right?
Why is that?
Like finding interest in everything, and that's the problem that we have. Is everything is endlessly fascinating, and so we often we get stuck in these rabbit holes, and we dig deeper and deeper, and 6 hours go by, and we went from researching one thing, and we're 30 levels away from it, but we see the connection before most other people do. But being able to harness it is difficult.
Right.
So if you need someone to research, an ADHD is great for that kind of stuff because this is what we love, is we love learning and digging deeper and seeing the connections and all of that stuff.
Well, you got to figure out how to save it too. I had an interesting call yesterday with somebody who's becoming more and more of a friend, and he's kind of been like the secret weapon behind the scenes for a lot of the top thought leaders. And so, I mean, did a lot of work with David Goggins as David Goggins was coming up. He was Tim Ferriss's head of special projects for a lot of years as Ferriss was coming up, and on and on and on. I mean, like, I could name 5 or 6 names that you know. And we spoke on the phone yesterday for like an hour or two, and one of the things that I was talking to him about is just kind of my process of writing a book, because editors are very, very good for things like developmental editing, like the point that you're trying to make, did you make it? Are there any holes in it? Are there any logical fallacies? Which is great and very important. And then copy editors are great for spelling and grammar and stuff like that. But once you get deeper into this type of work, you realize that there's a lot of nuances to it. So how you actually write something, or how you produce any piece of work anywhere, whether it's a package or a program or whatever it is, you actually have to design and engineer your product in order for it to work a certain way in the marketplace. And so there's no editors who are, call it like bestseller editors. There's no editors that are like marketing editors. Like there's nobody involved in the editing process of a book that looks at it and says, is this book, how it's written, marketable? You know what I'm saying? Are there stuff we can pull out? And then the other pieces of it are, of course, there's a lot of little problems that you encounter when you do this type of thing that you would only really know when you're deep into it. For example, how do you start and end a chapter? What are the transition type phrases that you use? How do you get in and get out of a story quickly? How do you compose a big idea statement in an introduction? And what I found is that as I read, and how do you come up with ideas like what was the one in this one with the bee sting? Right, where failure is like a bee sting. That one, actually, I can't think of anywhere other than just like I got stung by a bee and thought about it. But how do you think of those kinds of analogies, right? Because to me, those are what really makes this thing work. Whatever the thing is, it's the little pieces. You know, anybody can say, oh, you got to do like you got to take simple, small steps, and you've got to work, you've got to delay gratification, you've got to whatever, right? Like anybody can say that. Can you say that in a very unique way that's going to finally make it stick for somebody? Um, and what what I've discovered is that as I read more and more and more, I discover that certain authors that have already been proven in the marketplace seem to do one or two of these things really, really well. And I can actually look for it in their writing. For example, Morgan Housel starts and finishes chapters about as good as anybody I've ever seen. Ryan Holiday has some of the best cadence in writing. So the way that the musicality to his writing, this is all for nonfiction, right? James Clear obviously has those like one-line callouts. And a lot of those one-liners that are really powerful of his are actually old, very famous quotes that he's gone and reworded. And it goes on and on and on. And so what I will do is I'll actually go through as I'm reading the books, and I'll pick out those tactical bits, and I'll keep swipe files of like, oh, here's some really good examples of these types of transition statements. That way, when I'm there and I'm writing and I'm like, I'm stuck, I know what I want to say, but I need this way to get into it or whatever, I can go and reference stuff that's already been proven in the real world from these masters that do this one element really well and bring in these different elements. So try to say, okay, well, like, this guy does this thing really well. This guy does this thing. This guy does this thing. Okay, can I bring all of those in? And then from fiction comes the storytelling. So from fiction comes all of these analogies, like the bee sting type analogies. And I just have swipe files of these. Just as I'm reading, I'll just collect them over and over and over again. And I think whatever you do, like, you have to obsess over the thing that we do. I think step one is you have to really obsess over it. Like if you don't love it when you see somebody else who is a master at that, and you're not just in wonder how anybody could have created this, and B, fascinated at how they did it, then you're probably not doing the right thing. And if you are, then grab those pieces, like use them. It's a really powerful way to make your work stand out, whatever that work is. We're past an hour, aren't we? Shit. Okay. That's the pod. If you are looking for another episode to listen to, I had one and I lost it. This is such a dopey title because Amber titles these things. And so this one is one of the ones where it's like not a dopey title, but like a dopey title for me to say because it's like in third person and it's about me. But the information was good, I think. If you liked, especially like the end of this where I was talking more like philosophical about how I try to think about these things over time. You'll like this. It's a two-parter actually, but episode 124, the unexpected influences behind Jonathan's success. It's weird for me to say that, but that's episode 124, and then 126 is part 2. So episode 124, the unexpected influences behind Jonathan's success, part 1. Check that out. Have a listen, and you can laugh at me saying that title myself.
I never considered that I could troll you with the titles of the podcast. So now I can look at this in a whole new fun way. So thank you for that.
The titles are coming. The titles.
Yep.
That I enjoy so much.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the pod.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.